Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be diving into a genuinely unexpected intersection of history, engineering, and human psychology. We're taking a look at how the incredibly isolated geography of Idaho has been used over the decades to contain two radically different but incredibly volatile forces: deadly nuclear radiation and high-profile prison inmates. It's a fascinating connection, so let's get right into it. So, what do Cold War nuclear bombers and high-profile true crime inmates have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really bizarre joke, right? But the answer actually lies in the philosophy and architecture of extreme containment. We're going to be looking at how we, as a society, build structures to hold things or people that we deem intensely dangerous.
Quick look at our agenda for this explainer. We're going to trace the history of Idaho's extreme containment facilities, unpack Test Area North's legacy, look at the literal engineering of shielding, and then pivot to the evolution of Idaho prisons, the shift towards restorative justice and design, and finally, the reality of the inmate public spectacle.
All right, let's start with Section 1, Idaho's extreme containment facilities and a history of isolation. So picture this, it's the late 1940s and early 50s, and the Atomic Energy Commission desperately needs a massive, completely isolated space for some extremely hazardous containment experiments. Their solution? A vast 890 square mile stretch of the Snake River Plain Desert in Idaho. It was remote, sparsely populated, and honestly just perfectly suited for testing the absolute limits of science. This historical document establishes the sheer, monumental scale of the Cold War operations out there in the desert. They built a massive cluster of facilities inside the Idaho National Engineering and Environmental Laboratory, which became known as Test Area North, or just TAN.
Now, TAN was originally built for a project that sounds like it was ripped straight out of a sci-fi novel, but it was actually a very real, highly urgent military initiative, the Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Project. Basically, during the early days of the Cold War, the U.S. Air Force and the Atomic Energy Commission were in this frantic race to build a turbojet bomber propelled entirely by nuclear power. The dream was an airplane that could stay airborne almost indefinitely. But to make that a reality, they had to figure out how to put a literal nuclear reactor inside a jet. Moving on to Section 2, Test Area North's legacy and a timeline of technical extremes.
To really understand how physical containment evolved at this site, we need to look at a quick timeline. So, construction of TAN kicks off in 1952. Amazingly, by 1955, scientists actually proved that a nuclear reactor could successfully power a jet engine. But, as you can imagine, making it safe for the flight crew was a whole other beast. Ultimately, President John F. Kennedy canceled the entire project in March of 1961. But here's the wild part. The heavy-duty containment infrastructure at TAN was so incredibly robust that decades later, in 1990, it actually became the storage site for the highly dangerous radioactive debris from the 3 Mile Island reactor meltdown. So the site literally shifted from fueling a military arms race to becoming the ultimate safe storage vault.
Which brings us to Section 3, the engineering of shielding and protecting the human element.
Okay, so how on earth did they protect the people working on this stuff? Well, that is all about shielding. In this context, shielding involves using deeply layered materials, think lead, steel, water, earth, and heavy concrete, to protect humans from deadly radioactive attenuation. The mind-bending challenge for the A&P project was that they needed shielding thick enough to protect a flight crew from a live nuclear reactor, but somehow light enough to actually let an airplane take off and fly.
And because this reactor had to be mobile, engineers at TAN had to invent some truly wild containment methods and remote handling technologies. We are talking about pouring specially formulated, high-density concretes and designing these complex labyrinthine mazes so radiation literally couldn't bounce its way through. They used what they called shadow shields and even built shielded locomotives and massive earth-covered bunkers just to protect the workers on the ground. They went to absolute extremes for brute force physical containment.
All right, Section 4, the evolution of Idaho prisons, from physical to social engineering. Now, containment in Idaho isn't just about wrangling atoms and radiation, right? It's also about containing human populations. And Idaho's vast geography has historically hosted both. We can actually see a massive shift in philosophy by looking at the state's prison history. On one hand, you have the old Idaho State Penitentiary. This was a 19th century stone fortress plagued by lack of space, intense riots, and, plenty of modern-day haunted lore. The conditions there were so notoriously harsh that in 1972, following a series of severe riots, the state pushed to build a much more modern correctional facility in Kuna, shifting inmates far away from those archaic stone walls.
That leads into Section 5, Restorative Justice in Design and Softening the Environment.
Fast forward to today, and that architectural evolution has totally accelerated into what's called restorative justice design. Just look at this stark contrast. A traditional prison is exactly what you picture in your head. Heavy steel and concrete, lockdown cells, and thick glass walls separating the guards from the inmates. It's essentially the human equivalent of that Cold War radiation shielding we just talked about. But recently, Hummel architects worked with the Idaho Department of Correction to design the East Dorm. This new 152-bed facility totally ditches the fortress aesthetic for a residential setting. It's got day rooms, kitchens, and get this, an open control room with no glass barrier at all between the staff and the residents.
The really crucial point to take away here is the philosophy driving all of this. It operates on a reward accountability model. By providing things like kitchens and laundry facilities, residents actually have to practice independence and self-sufficiency. And that open design, it's intentionally there to encourage positive, everyday human interaction with the correctional staff. The state's overarching goal is to reduce recidivism by making the prison environment function much more like the actual society these folks are preparing to re-enter.
And you can see the direct impact of this architecture on the mindset of the people living inside it. Listen to what one East Dorm resident had to say about it. This is exposing me personally to more of a community or home setting where I can focus on bettering myself. It's incredible. The physical walls have literally been softened to encourage rehabilitation rather than just delivering pure, hard punishment.
Finally, Section 6, the inmate public spectacle, reality versus rehabilitation. Now, this is where our explainer gets really complex. There is this intense, almost undeniable friction between modern rehabilitative prison design and the harsh demands of public spectacle. Because when it comes to high-profile cases, the public often has very, very different ideas about containment than the architects do. To explore this impartially, we can look at the social media frenzy surrounding Brian Kohberger, a maximum security inmate in the Idaho system. His case serves as a really fascinating lens into the clash between public perception and the realities of modern correctional management. For instance, in a Reddit thread reacting to tabloid rumors that Kohberger was complaining about prison food and acting like a diva, public sentiment was just incredibly raw. One user blatantly wrote, "If he hates it there, then I hope they keep him there. It's prison, not vacation. Sorry he doesn't like the food. He's not special." This perfectly illustrates how, in high-profile cases, the public heavily leans towards strict punishment and discomfort, often totally rejecting the idea of restorative comfort. But, amidst all those emotional reactions, other commenters actually pointed out the cold, hard logistics of human containment. As one user noted, prisoners are traded often. Prisons are a business. If he is traded, it will have nothing to do with his diva behavior and everything to do with the cost. It's a really solid point. Managing high-profile, segregated individuals is a massive logistical and financial strain on any state facility. It's not just about public anger, it's about the numbers. And perhaps most tellingly, some of the comments wished for a complete return to the absolute extremes of physical containment. One person wrote, "I wish they could send him to federal supermax prison. That place, from what I have read, is truly a fate worse than death." That sentiment right there, it really echoes that old Cold War desire for impenetrable walls. It shows this deep public fascination with locking a perceived threat away behind the heaviest, most isolated structures imaginable. Now, it's really important to note that the Idaho Department of Correction officially stepped in and completely debunked the rumor of a transfer due to diva antics. There was no truth to it. But honestly, the truth of the rumor matters a bit less than the reaction it sparked. It shows us that even while correctional departments are moving towards open designs and rehabilitation, intense public scrutiny and anger remain a constant, incredibly heavy force pushing in the exact opposite direction.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We've seen the massive concrete walls built out in the desert to contain a nuclear reactor, and we've looked at the open, glass-free rooms designed to rehabilitate human behavior. So what do you think? Whether we're trying to contain dangerous energy or high-profile members of society, does true security ultimately come from thicker walls or from better design? Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll leave you to think on that.